Unitarian Universalist, as a feminist and as a human being, I felt and continue to feel a moral imperative to stand in solidarity with this movement, to bear witness to the grotesque history of our country related to all peoples of color, and to demand that this be a time of reckoning and a time of real change. Not too long ago, I naively expected that the national and international uprisings following that video of the George Floyd lynching on May 25th of just this year would compel the police to holster their guns, to engage in some deep soul searching about what they were doing, to see themselves and be horrified by what they saw. But sadly, police killings have continued. The video of that murder, the cruelty of that officer, lit a match under all people of conscience, although clearly that murder was no anomaly. Black communities have continued reason to fear the police. I find this slide just heartbreaking. Is my son next? On September 24th, a grand jury indicted a detective on 3 charges of first-degree wanton endangerment for firing blindly into an apartment and endangering neighbors, but not for killing Breonna Taylor, the 26-year-old EMT pictured here, who was asleep in her bed when she was shot to death. A friend, Kathy McGoldrick, had started a weekly vigil in Ellicottville right after the Floyd killing, but I was afraid of catching COVID, so I had been avoiding going to in-person gatherings. But when that jury in Louisville, Kentucky wasn't even tasked with bringing murder charges, and that is surely what it was, of Breonna in her own bed, I just couldn't sit it out any longer. It has to stop. This has to stop. Now, hanging out on a corner in Ellicottville with my friend Kathy is not a bad gig, although it was awfully cold and windy this past Friday. Sometimes there's even a party-like atmosphere. People are honking, there's music playing, and the group gathered there feels some kind of transcendent bond. It's especially heartening when young people lay on their horns and pump their fists and yell support out their car windows. And I'd say about half the people who drive by us are supportive. It's especially poignant when the rare Black motorist drives by with her family and her passengers look out the window and they make the heart sign with their hands at us. But then there are the troglodytes. They aren't always in pickups, but often. Some are still screaming, Trump 2020. Others yell things like, all lives matter, to which we respond, yes, that's the point. We are not saying that Black lives matter more than white or blue lives. We are saying that until Black people know justice, no one knows justice. Justice for all is one of our American principles. Justice for some is not justice. Justice for some is privilege. At our vigil, one guy regularly yells, get a job. That's an amazing response to a small group of people standing outside on a late afternoon holding picket signs. I had to think pretty hard as to what cognitive contortion produced that. He must think that people with the time and inclination to assemble at a peaceful vigil must all actually be radical democratic socialists who are also somehow on the dole. Well, I'm on Social Security. Does that count? Did I lose my free speech rights when I accepted Social Security? And there are also people who are downright ugly, downright offensive. Mostly it's men, and mostly they are in trucks again, and they somehow feel compelled to flash their middle finger at us or gun their trucks and smoke us with their stinking black exhaust. It's disgusting, and I can't fathom it. It has gotten worse since January 6th. There is a more palpable anger out there. One man came up to Kathy and asked her, why are you still doing this? And she explained that she feels the moral imperative to keep the Black Lives message out there and alive. And he said, but don't you know that there are people around here who would like to shoot you? And we admitted to one another after hearing that we do feel some anxiety every time a car slows down. Are they looking at our signs? Are they trying to read what we're saying? Or are they thinking about running into us? By far, for me, was the worst was the man who bellowed out the window of his truck, "White lives matter more." Think about that. He actually screamed it out loud, "White lives matter more." That was gut-wrenching to hear. That person, that bruised, twisted soul, actually spat out the words that really define the behavior of American institutions. It's gross, but he's right. Structural racism is embedded in American life in a way that suggests that white lives matter more in everything from who gets mortgages in nice neighborhoods, to who gets the better schools, to who gets interviewed and then hired, who gets the higher wage, who gets the business loan, even who gets to drive a nice car, or who gets to shop in a pricey store without being followed. You can't see this slide very well. I'm sorry the graphics aren't clearer, but one of structural racism's terrible realities is that Black wealth in America is less than 1/10 of white wealth. Black home ownership is roughly 30% lower than white home ownership. And let's look at how our government reinforces structural racism. For example, the Small Business Administration doled out $23.2 billion in loans in 2019. But when it came to Black-owned businesses, the figure dropped to $755 million. Blacks own 9.5% of American businesses, but were given only 4% of loans by the Small Business Administration. And that was before the pandemic. 41% of Black businesses ceased operations this April, as opposed to 17% of white. It's just an example of structural racism. Another obvious and especially egregious example of structural racism is the way it informs how our police operate and who goes to jail. Blacks comprise 12% of the population, but 48% of the prison population. A 2016 study showed that 1 in 3 Black boys born in 2001 can expect to be incarcerated at some point in his life. An analysis by ProPublica found that over a 2-year span from 2010 to 2012, young Black men were 21 times more likely to get shot by police than young white men. 21 times more likely. We white liberals have for too long ignored the structural and institutional racism at the root of these deaths. I've even heard arguments to dismiss it or set it aside, to in effect adapt to the disproportionate killing of unarmed Black men. There are many ways to do this, but the most insidious one is when we blame the victim. We say things like, well, they should have made better choices. And yes, some of these young men should have made better choices. But the thing is, white people make bad choices too, and we don't pay for those mistakes with our lives at anywhere near the same rate. White people aren't incarcerated at an incredibly high rate for their bad choices. You can see by this slide the disparity in police response. Black people use drugs less than white people, but are 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs. So no, it doesn't matter if Michael Brown had just stolen cigars from a convenience store. Shooting in the back and killing an unarmed Black teenager for stealing cigars and trying to escape from police is not an appropriate level of response. And it doesn't matter if George Floyd tried to pass a bad $20 bill. He may not have even known it was bogus. He was unarmed and there was no reason for him to be killed. And no, it doesn't matter what Tamir Rice's parents might have done or what kind of influence they might have had on him. He was a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun in a Cleveland park, and he was shot dead within 2 seconds of officers arriving on the scene. 2 seconds. That's 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. It is simply indefensible. But before we can do something about it, we have to be able to name it and be aware that it exists. Eduardo Bonilla Silva, a sociologist at Duke University, has said the main problem nowadays is not the folks with hoods, but the folks dressed in suits. The more we assume that the problem of racism is limited to the Klan, the birthers, the Tea Party, or to the Republican Party, the less we understand that racial domination is a collective process, and we are all in this game. We are all in this game. So what do we do? First, we have to wrap our guilty, reluctant heads around the fact that our nation is founded on the enslavement of Africans. The United States Capitol building was built partially by the enslaved. We can't escape the fact that the insurrection on January 6th to quote unquote stop the steal was really an exercise in white supremacy. It was an effort to steal the vote back from Black voters. Those white, mostly men, brandishing their Confederate flags and their ugly slogans, those men don't believe that Black Americans are Americans with the same full rights as they have. Yet the main engine for this country's initial economic growth, cotton, came directly off the backs of enslaved people. That's an ugly history none of us can escape. One thing we can do to confront this head on is to reimagine policing. Let's briefly consider the history of policing. In 1704, the colony of Carolina developed the first slave patrol. It consisted of roving bands of armed white citizens who would stop, question, and punish slaves caught without permit to travel. They were civil organizations controlled and maintained by county courts. By the 1880s, all major US cities had municipal police forces in place. Patrols in the northern US became useful for breaking up labor strikes and keeping immigrants out. It's not too huge of a leap to say that policing evolved, at least in part, to protect the haves from the have-nots, and it's grown increasingly proactive rather than reactive. I read an excellent article recently that is actually titled, "Policing is the Glue of Whiteness." Now, I am supportive of individual police officers, and I do acknowledge their bravery, the work they do to protect us, and the very real risks they face in the line of duty. But they, like me, like all of us, are racist. We have integrated a subconscious racial bias. That is something we have not actually dealt with. We keep having conversations about how we should tweak this or ban that. Maybe we'll pass a policy that's anti-chokehold. And that sounds wonderful. Maybe body cams will make a difference. The one thing that has made a difference isn't body cams, it's cell phones. But that only works when there are bystanders who are willing to get involved after the fact. God knows how many Black men have been murdered off camera. So if we don't get to the root of the problem, we'll be in the same place over and over and over again, even if we pass 100 different policies that say, don't choke a person, don't place your knee on a person's neck. We obviously do need better policies. And we need better mechanisms to hold police accountable around their use of force. In April 2019, USA Today reported that over the previous decade, 85,000 police officers had been investigated for misconduct. Force is necessary to use sometimes, even lethal force, but it's incontrovertible that the use of lethal force is not being applied consistently, objectively, or appropriately. And officers that use excessive force are rarely disciplined, much less fired. They must be held accountable. The unfortunate meme to defund the police has garnered a lot of attention. Defund has been misconstrued to mean disband. That is obviously not going to happen. I think it would be a better conversation if we talked about redirecting police funding. They don't need military-grade weapons like tanks. Police budgets range from 20 to 45% of discretionary funding in major metropolitan areas. The NYPD has a budget of $5.6 billion. LAPD has a budget of $1.7 billion. This is in 2020 numbers. Some of those funds could be spent creating or improving mobile crisis teams. Staff them with crisis-trained behavioral health clinicians who are culturally aware and of systemic bias and racism, who can respond quickly, assess, de-escalate, treat, and assist in transporting a person to the correct level of care instead of involving the police. Embed them in police departments. By their very existence and expertise, they can be ambassadors for racial justice. It just makes sense to remove, or at least insulate, armed personnel from mental health crises. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a lecture to the 1966 Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. He titled it, "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution." And he said, "There are some things in our nation and in our world to which I am proud to be maladjusted, and I call upon you to be maladjusted, and all people of goodwill to be maladjusted to these things until the good society is realized." Sadly, his remarks hold true for us today. We must continue to be maladjusted to the systemic racism which pervades our society, which pervades our institutions, which pervades our very culture. Some years back, the extraordinary Black writer Ta-Nehisi Coates published an article in The Atlantic about the time having come to make reparations for our original sin of slavery. I saw a lot of blowback from people who objected, saying things like, "But I didn't own slaves, my ancestors didn't own slaves, and I don't oppress Black people. Why should I be forced to pay for reparations now?" Well, the truth is anyone who is not a person of color has benefited from white supremacy, and there are ways to do reparations that could go toward repairing some of the damage wrought by systemic racism. For example, the Small Business Administration could be required to allocate 25% of its budget to minority-owned businesses. Mortgage lenders could set up special programs to promote Black home ownership. And if we can't get to free college for all, we certainly could make education at all the historically Black colleges and universities free. And we can all look for ways to support Black businesses and Black artists and Black charities. I hope that as a culture, we are finally far enough away from slavery to start engaging with the injustice. I hope that we have finally hit a critical mass. I hope that's what the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris portends. But we must keep the pressure on. We must keep the vigils going. We must educate and confront ourselves, our own weaknesses and biases. And we must write and protest and agitate and support and show up in every way we can, including at boring local council meetings when they're discussing police budgets. We must not sleep through the revolution. The time is long overdue for us to do something about it. We must be maladjusted. So, thank you. I'd like to open it up. Let's have some time for discussion. I'd like to hear your thoughts, your reactions, any questions that you might have. So let me hit stop share. And if you would unmute yourselves, we can have a conversation.
That was excellent, Kristin. Especially, I mean, both your passion and your information. And I think the data that you got in the PowerPoint, that's really powerful.
Thank you. I didn't want to be kind of geeking out on everybody with, you know, slide after slide of information, but it cumulatively, you know, because I mean, everybody agrees, everybody, at least I think with our group, understands that there's structural racism, but when you see all the pieces of it, and especially even to things like the Small Business Administration, I mean, come on. The government shouldn't be engaged in systemic racism anymore. That really pissed me off.
And small business, those numbers really got to me, I think, more than anything else. That was incredible. I heard or watched a remarkable movie this afternoon just before this. I don't know if you know of the I'm Not Your Negro, a James Baldwin movie, but I would strongly recommend it to anybody. It really was beautifully done. Heard about it this morning on a podcast, and it really hit home.
What did you watch it on?
I watched it on something called, it came up when I Googled the movie, it came up. I would have to close my iPad to pull it up.
Well, maybe you could just,
I'll find
I'll
it and let
tell
you
you.
know before
It's
we're
available
finished.
on Netflix.
it's on
Okay,
Netflix? Okay.
I didn't think it was any longer. Good.
Okay, okay.
If it's on Netflix, that's great. Otherwise, I'll find it and post it afterwards.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I think you did a great job, Kristin. Thank
Kristin.
you.
Thank you.
Kristin, yes, it was a great job. Do you have any information on any of the city police departments, if they're
Locally?
doing anything at all for training?
I don't know what's happening locally.
And how about the bigger cities?
Well, I think the Buffalo Police Department, they disbanded their riot unit after overreacting and, shoving that 75-year-old man down to the
Oh,
curb.
right.
So I think they probably are engaging in some kind of re-education, but I don't know exactly what that is.
Olean has a committee that has been formed to, because the governor insisted on and gave a date by which every city, municipality, I'm not sure exactly what, started doing some type of a review. And Olean was kind of slow to get started, but they have gotten started. They have a citizen review committee that are coming up with a plan. I mean, this won't necessarily be a review committee of police actions at this point, but they're trying to come up with a plan. And in my ward, historically, we have the very first Black council member.
Mhm.
And that was just appointed. Nate Smith quit shortly after he was elected, and then Vernon Robinson was appointed. And he is just amazing. I've been following him on Facebook. He puts up everything. He puts up everything that happens on the explanations of the minutes and what's going on and what the discussions are and all sorts of things. And the most recent thing, I think they met just last week, and the most recent thing is they are discussing the whole issue about having social workers respond to possible mental health issues. And at this point, the concern is that there are not enough of them to justify having like a full-time social worker. It would be hard to have an on-call social worker because you have to rotate it around. And not everybody, just because you're a social worker or a counselor, does not mean you're trained in diffusing a violent. I know when I was teaching at ACC, I went up for a training in Canada, and that's exactly what it was. We spent literally 3 days learning how to de-escalate violently mentally ill people, how to distract people, et cetera. And it's not your typical training at all. It's very, very different. So there was just a concern about the practicality. And if you put people who are not trained in that, just because they're counselors or social workers or psychologists, they may pose a danger to themselves and also to the officer that might be accompanying them. So that's where the current discussion is going on in Olean right now. And it's a good discussion to have, but I do know that our police, some of them are okay with doing some de-escalating and some are not. We've got some.
I just want to step in and say, just because a mentally ill person is involved in a standoff or an incident, it does not necessarily mean that they will be violent. So I just want to make sure that there is that distinction made.
Right.
Okay?
And I think that's an excellent point. And I think that in many of these shootings, police are assuming if someone is having a mental health crisis that they're going to be dangerous and reacting before they've taken a minute. I mean, there was a shooting, I think in Texas last week. The police called The police were called the day before and escorted this guy to the hospital, but he was back home. They didn't have enough to hold him. And he was having a meltdown again. And the officer that responded this time, I mean, somebody filmed it. The family was behind him saying, don't shoot, don't shoot. And the guy came out yelling and he shot him just like that,
Mhm.
you know, just assumed danger.
That is often the bigger problem is the police response.
Yeah.
And the assumption that there could be danger, and it's not necessarily the case.
Right.
And actually, there's also been a number of cases where people who are deaf or diabetic have been harmed by police because they didn't comply with what the commands of the police are. So, you know, there's just a lot more training that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
Linda, I find it funny that you had to go to Canada to have a training on de-escalating violence.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. It was a company, and three of the teachers from JCC, one of the psychology teachers, I was a human service teacher, and the other gentleman was the head of the criminal justice program. And so the college made funds available for the three of us to go because it was pertinent to what we were teaching. And it was held at a place up in Canada. And it was very interesting. What was even more interesting is that when we went out to dinner after one of the things, the two male teachers that I was with decided to ditch me, let me find my way back alone to the hotel we were staying at, and they went to a strip club. Yeah.
I'm going to interject again that in the United States, there has been some training. I think it's called CIT training. And it is for police training to handle mentally ill in situations. And it's slowly spreading throughout the United States. I don't know the current research on it, how widespread it is, or whether it's been modified to include other groups, as Linda and Kristin have been saying, Blacks and, you know, deaf and things like that. But there was a de-escalation training started in Georgia, I believe, that was going around the states, as I said, specifically for the mentally ill.
Does anybody know the statistics or the problem in our county? I mean, I think, you know, when you think of it, we can see advocacy on the federal level or on the state level, but here, what's the information and what's the particular way that citizens who wanted to get involved in Black Lives Matter and that justice could act? Do you know? Does anybody know?
There's a local Black Lives Matter group. It's gone through some struggles. It started out Black Lives Matter, and then it changed its name, and then it decided to be more inclusive and deal with other issues. And now I see there's been a split there, and it has gone back to being the Black Lives Matter group. And then there's for people who are gay or trans, they have now kind of formed their own group. They were trying to all come together, and now they've kind of decided they really have different goals. And so the Black Lives Matter people have been very vocal and very prominent at our local chamber meetings, not chamber, but city council meetings. And in fact, right now, we do have at least one of our city council people who is rather openly racist at times. And so now the Black Lives Matter group are mounting a challenge to his next election. And so the last thing that I just saw was, hey, come on, get out behind Ezra. Ezra Johnson's going to be running. And so they're trying to get some support for him, financial support, and getting his name out there. So
So does he have is there a committee that's, raising funds?
I'm not sure that they're there at that point, but I would be glad to let you know when they get to that point.
I would like to know, thank
Because
you.
I also, that was my initial thought is hey, I'd contribute, and I think somebody asked the question and they said, well, we're not there yet or something. So, but I'll keep that in mind. But I don't want to take up too much time, but some of you, I know Kathy knows about it. This past fall, early fall, the boys in the trucks came by. And I live right on West State Street, and there was a Trump parade. And they were in all their trucks with their Trump cars and some Trump flags and big placards and some Confederate flags and honking their horns and yahooing and yelling all the way down. I missed the first few because I was hearing all this noise and I went to the window, but I started counting and I counted at least 60. And I may have missed a couple. Now, some of those people may have just turned into that group. Not everyone had a flag. So some people may have just turned into that group and then got trapped in it. But there were 60 cars that looked like they were traveling together. And then Kathy saw them down at, was it the Walmart Plaza that you saw them, Kathy?
Yeah, we saw them turn in the Kmart Plaza.
Oh, the Kmart.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we saw them. It was kind of scary, I thought, because they're so racist.
And they were rowdying around for a little while, and then they had done their big deal. But I believe that probably some of them were in Washington, and I have heard from a neighbor that who looked at some of the FBI pictures that are up, that there were 2 local people that person recognized and contacted the FBI about. So I think there's no doubt that we have it definitely in this area. There was also, like 2 weeks after our new city councilman was appointed, he and his wife were taking an evening walk, and one of the trucks with a big Trump flag and Confederate flag saw them walking, deliberately went around the corner, past them, yelling out, "Black lives don't matter."
Oh, wow.
So we have
Kristin,
our own group
oh,
in
I'm sorry.
the area.
Go ahead, Teresa.
I just wanted to tell you, I invited one of my friends, Sue Stevens, and I see she's on, but we don't see her picture. So she goes by Karen Stevens. She goes by Sue. Yes, yes, we can hear you. She lives in Missouri now.
Oh, wow.
Go ahead.
Hi, everybody.
She's an oldie girl.
Welcome.
So I don't know how to do my picture. It looks like I've got everything on here but that. I can see all of you just fine.
Little interference in the airwaves there, I think.
Oh,
Yeah, kind of hard to hear you. You're breaking up.
Linda, are you in Ward 4?
6.
6.
Yeah,
Well-
Vernon Robinson is our new council member.
Is Kevin Doherty Ward 4?
Yeah.
Well, Sonia McCall just announced today that she is also running.
Yeah, she and Ezra now are both running. I don't know for which party, but yes, I saw that she's also running, and she would be excellent as well. She and Ezra both would be.
That'd be good.
That'd be very good. But Kevin had 3 other people run against him, And he did some real dirty deals. One of them was a gay man, and he put up some really nasty things about that man.
Yeah, I don't know Ezra at all, but good person.
I don't know him except through, there is this local Black Lives Matter group on Facebook, which you can join.
I think I'm a member of it.
Yeah, he's been posting some things on there but I've never met him. I don't know him personally.
Okay.
I know in the area, there has been a history of a hate group in McKean County for years and years and years. When I looked into it, it's mostly one family. They are their own little hate group. Allegheny County has also had hate groups.
And there are Confederate flags hanging out, you know, up here in the boondocks. You see them in these particularly distressed looking trailer parks. It's just unfathomable. I think people don't understand. The Confederacy went down, you know, it's over. They're still trying to refight that war.
Yeah.
And such a terrible waste of energy.
So,
I know.
Kristin, do you have,
Go
I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to ask if you had any suggestions. Do you have any suggestions on what we could do as individual citizens to help the cause in whatever way?
Well, I think we're pretty limited in terms of actual actions that we can take. I don't know if, for instance, writing a letter to the editor, if the people we want to speak to read letters to the editor or editorials. I think, you know, I'm going to send some of my stimulus check to a historically Black college and university, and I'm looking into, I know there are bail funds that accept donations that can be used to try to kind of help with that disparity. I don't really know. I mean, I'm a volunteer at the Olean Food Pantry, which serves everyone and feels like a way to be supportive of justice in some way, but it's not specifically, you know, the food pantry is open to everyone. So kind of woefully thin on suggestions. I'm sorry, Teresa.
But you know, there are
How
things.
about, oh, go ahead.
There are things you can do. I mean, certainly nationally. I mean, when we look at federal policies or at the state level, locally, it's hard unless you're in a big city and kind of you see the problems. So, you know, that it's blasted there and you have a lot of people organizing. But I think, you know, you do what you can do. Paulo Freire, who was an educator from Brazil, said that do what you can do passionately. You know, for example, you could, I could do an article on the disparity in healthcare for people of color.
Yep.
I mean, that would show you could take whatever area you're at and look at it somewhere.
And we can all support the, you know, Della and the African American
Right.
Center and right, and we do what we can do.
Right.
There are some websites that list Black-owned businesses, Black-owned restaurants near us. Not that there are any probably close by here, but Black-owned businesses to support. And I've tried to do a few of those. I did find while you've been talking that I Am Not Your Negro is available back again on Netflix. So that would be the easy way to see it. I saw it on something called Tubi or Tubi, T-U-B-I, which was a free streaming place, but probably Netflix would be easier. Michael Moore had recommended it in one of his recent podcasts, and it really was remarkable. I strongly recommend it. Helps to light a fire.
Yeah.
You know, I always think that education is is key in something like this in terms of getting younger people to buy in.
Of course.
And at the same time, I know from friends who are teachers in Olean that when some students, came to school wearing Black Lives Matter masks, others showed up soon afterwards wearing Blue Lives Matter masks.
Mhm.
So I think somehow, the challenge is to say we're not exclusive. I mean, it's not, yes, we believe all lives matter, but let's be realistic here that many of us have had privileges that people of color have never seen. So that's really where the focus needs to be. But it would seem that education has got to, our schools have to be a piece of this.
Well, one of the things that I believe is hopefully going to happen in Olean, my son-in-law is a firefighter, and after the whole thing, with the killings this past fall and summer, he was very upset by that. And we were talking about, I said, you got this all white fire department. What do you think you could do? And so he said that he would like to mentor, possibly like go into the high school. He said, we should be hiring people of color. So I think he may have been appointed to this commission. I'll have to talk to him and see if he has been attending their meetings or how it has worked out with his work schedule or not. But I believe he had talked either with the fire chief or with the mayor about the possibility of him going into the high schools and talking to some of the high school students and saying, you know what, when you're thinking about careers, think about joining the fire department. You don't have to have a college degree to do so. You can come in, because he doesn't have a college degree, but once he got in, he took advantage of every kind of training that he could possibly get. He's now a paramedic and a paramedic trainer because he's gone right all the way up. He's got certified as a fire photographer. He's certified for water rescue. He's got all these different opportunities that he's been able to get. And so he wants to go into the high school and talk to the students and see if he can attract some minority students to apply in their senior year, which is what he did. He got out of high school, and the following year he applied and went for the training and everything and got accepted. And it's civil service, so you've got to take the test and do all of that. But do that with the police, with the fire department, would make an enormous difference in a community like this, to have some people of color, join their ranks, and women, but we're getting a few women.
And Kristin, I would suggest that you keep your notes on your talk, and the PowerPoint is very good. And if you probably need to, as time goes by, update it. And when we're allowed to socialize and we're allowed to be with other people, one thing, many of the churches in this area have committees and education groups. Get on the docket and talk. I mean, that's one way, of having them think about something maybe they didn't think about before. So it's maybe little things or big things, but it's doing something.
Well, the other thing is, many of us are on nonprofit boards, and, as I look around the tables, there's not a whole lot of, persons of color on many of these boards. So maybe that's also part of where, some of us can start to advocate for some more diversity on the boards that we serve on.
Well, even membership for the village. We're part of the village. And I know that Kim has talked about it. And to tell you the truth, I mean, when I lived in Chicago, many of my adult and all my students were African American. I mean, so because that was who was there and where I lived. Here, there's one couple who that are African American, and that's it. So I went to I went to Della to talk to her about this, but she said she's not a spokesperson for African Americans. and I had a few names, and none of the numbers that I had worked. So, I mean, it's sort of become, I mean, somehow you have to be able to connect, get together with them in more natural ways, instead of saying, it would be great to have 2 or 3 Black people. You know,
Yeah.
we just don't, we're not in that climate here.
Although, speaking of climate, when the Southwest gets as hot as it's going to get, people are going to come flocking back to Western New York because we've got water.
Well, and you know, Vernon Robinson is not a native of Olean. We actually went to see him speak at Bonaventure a couple of years ago, and
DC.
From DC, and we have his book. He's an author as well. So people do come here from other places. So Kristin, that's not necessarily out of the realm.
Well, that happened in Chicago because people from the projects in Chicago began to move, and they moved into one of the first when they could be mobile areas was Uptown, which was where I lived in Chicago, which at one point was extremely I mean, it was beautiful because it was every race and color and whatever. It was poor, but it was and then a whole group of Blacks moved from that part of Chicago into Uptown, which out of the project area. And so we got more African Americans. So it changed. And then more Asians came in. So neighborhoods do change. I haven't been here long enough to see that. And, but maybe the drought or the temperature will change soon. Who knows? But it does make us more aware and, with clear eyes. When to look at what's happening, and when you read the newspaper and who's arrested and all that and what's arrested, you can check. And little steps, but they're steps.
I can tell you that there is definitely a difference in how people of color have historically been treated by the police here.
Here?
Yes.
I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have 3 children, 2 of whom are Asian, and one of whom decided to get into some trouble in his youth, and it was not good. It was not good. There was a criminal event that he actually didn't take part of, but knew about. The 3 white boys that actually committed the crime didn't go to jail.
Unfortunately, being a small town, who you know and who your parents are works for you or against you. But jumping on an earlier discussion, community policing, where police are actually out of their car and walking around the community would help. They would know who is suffering from disabilities. They would know who, the personality of the people who aren't necessarily white. And I think the school resource officers, if they still have money in their budget for them, would be also good for being able to be more of a character witness in some situations, but as I said, being in a small town works for you sometimes and against you.
Right.
Absolutely.
I see that I made a note for myself to be sure to watch a show tonight on PBS. I don't know if you've seen it, or seen a note about it. How It Feels to Be Free. It's going to be mostly jazz with Nina Simone and Lena Horne. It sounds like a real treat at 9:00 tonight.
What channel, Connie? Is that a PBS? Okay. How It Feels to Be Free.
Yeah, that's great music.
Is this in honor of
I'm
Martin
sure.
Luther King Day?
I'm sure. When I was in Philadelphia years and years ago, just starting work after college, Nina Simone was in the neighborhood, and played regularly at a little jazz bar around the corner. She was just a kid, but boy, was it a treat. Wonderful memories. Yeah.
Wow.
That was in the South Bronx,
Oh,
right?
Beg your pardon. This was in inner city Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
Wow.
I think one of the things that
Well,
I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this, but I think one of the things that we need as a society to figure out is how to do the deprogramming of the racial attitudes
Hmm.
that right now, particularly young white men are, I mean, there's been a huge increase in hate groups and things like that since Barack Obama became president. They skyrocketed after that. And there's just that white privilege and that white entitlement. And I don't know what we can do to erase that, to diffuse that, to
I think if you had more people in businesses and more people in positions, you would have people who have this white privilege would have to, they resolve cognitive dissonance. I was at a interfaith meeting long time ago, and we had people from India, and it was on prejudice. It wasn't just specifically African American, and I went up to this whole group and I said, do you feel, here in this community, do you feel any of that? No. Because they were doctors and they were teaching at the university. They were in those positions, and how could somebody be a doctor and not be good? And so it helps change your mind.
Mhm.
Or if they're your teachers and you like you respect them, it changes it. So the more people can be in positions where you can meet, or your next door neighbor. Here it's different. We have a very minority of African Americans. I don't know what the Asian minority, well,
It's even smaller.
but they're in different positions.
Right. They're in positions of power mostly.
That's the difference. Anyway, that's one thing.
One thing though,
What, Mike?
I'm sorry, addressing how to the young white male syndrome. One of the things that the Boy Scouts or Scouts BSA has just done is they've required a diversity and inclusion merit badge to attain the rank of Eagle Scout.
That's
We have
fantastic.
1,500 youth in our immediate area here that are involved in scouting currently.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is an opportunity, I think, to take this agenda and move it forward in a way that could be tailored to the Scouts, but I can certainly give you some more information on that. Perhaps invite you, Kristin, to do a presentation for.
I'm thrilled. I really would.
Yeah.
Whatever I can do. I'm still going to Ellicottville on Friday afternoons at 4. If anybody wants to suit up and stand out there and be yelled at.
I didn't realize it was a weekly protest. Is it,
Yeah.
Kristin?
We're still doing it. It was 5 of us, only 5 of us were there this past Friday. And I think the numbers were never over 20 because it's not an organized, there's no group. My friend Kathy McGoldrick just was so sickened by the George Floyd murder that she went to the closest town and started with a handmade picket sign saying Black Lives Matter. And she said she was kind of questioning whether this was making any difference, but she was approached by a Black pedestrian woman who said, "Thank you. My God, I never expected to see a white person in Ellicottville mouthing these words." And Kathy said that just made her committed to let's keep doing this. Maybe
it makes it worth it. Sure.
Yeah. Do you know when we were first married more than 50 years ago, and we had both graduated from Bonaventure, and my husband got a job here, and so we wound up staying here, which was not our intention, but you know, you took the job you could get. And so he got a job and I got a job, but his family and my family didn't live in the area. So we would travel for holidays and, you know, long weekends and things like that. One time coming home, we were on Route 16 in Hinsdale, approaching Olean, and up on the hill, there was a giant cross burning. And we looked at each other and said, what the hell have we gotten ourselves into? Why are we here? And then I never saw it again. But that one night, and it was a huge, big cross burning up on some of the hills there.
Wow.
Wow. We didn't have a bookended time here, but I see it's after 5. It's probably coming up on time to rustle up some dinner. Does anybody have any last things that you want to share? Any feelings? Anything left that we've not covered?
Kristin, I apologize that we missed the beginning of your presentation. Is there any way that you could share some of those slides via email?
I'll send you the PowerPoint presentation if you'd like, and there's notes in the, you know, in the bottom that have the comments that went well with all the slides. So
Great, thank you.
you're most welcome. When I did this for the Unitarians, I didn't have any slides at all. I just, they looked at my face for 15 minutes and I found that kind of awkward. So I was just amazed when I typed in Black Lives Matter as I was looking for slides, you know, the abundance of resources out there. It was just perfect.
It went very well.
Thank you so much for it. It sure did.
Thank you very much.
Meant a lot.
Kathy wants to say something.
She's muted.
Kathy, you're muted.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
We'd like you better muted.
Growing up in Brooklyn, I found prejudice there from some Black kids. And then when we moved to Mansfield, Pennsylvania, because I was from the city, I was an outsider and I thought they were prejudiced against me because I was from the city and I had been around a lot of other different kinds of people. So I felt it right along when I was growing up, even because I was just white. It didn't matter what color my skin was, which was sad.
Well, I think there's economic prejudice in many places as well.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. Thank you for your presentation, Kristin.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for
Yes.
being here today. And
Nice way to celebrate
Okay.
this holiday.
That is
Perfect timing.
true.
Sure was.
Yes.
Thank you, Kristin.
we'll be able to be together for it next
Thank
year.
you.
Thank you, Kristin.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Yes.
Don't
Thank
forget
you.
February,
Bye.
February
Bye.
ideas.